Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing my top books of 2024. Now, I'm not doing a top 24 of 2024 because honestly, I just didn't really have that many books that I felt I could talk about that in depthly. And honestly, some of these I can't really talk super in depthly either, but I liked them. The vibes were there. So they were in my top books. I have 15 books I'd like to talk about across 8 genres, including romance, contemporary, sci fi, thriller, fantasy, literary fiction, nonfiction, and classic. Surprisingly, there is one classic right at the end. But before we get into that, I do have 8 honorable mentions I'd like to talk about. Some of them are rereads, some of them I don't really have much to say, so I'm just going to try and get through these pretty quickly. My first honorable mention is Book of Night by Holly Black. Now, I know this is an unpopular opinion because it seems like everyone I've heard talk about this, especially on BookTube, hasn't really enjoyed this. But I personally really liked it. I did read it for the first time back in 2023, and back then I gave it 3 stars. I didn't love it, didn't hate it. I felt kind of middle of the road about it, but I wanted to see, what everyone was talking about. I Since then I honestly had just kept thinking about it and thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? I kind of want to reread it. So I did. I listened to the audiobook again, and I enjoyed it so much more the second time. I bumped it up to a 4 star. I had a good time with this. I know most people don't like it, but honestly, I thought it was great. My next reread, a throwback, The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Now, the last time I read this was in high school, so it's been a solid decade in between reads. And honestly, this held up just as much as it did back then. I loved this just as much as when I read it the first time when I was like 16. I laughed just as hard. I cried, honestly, probably even harder. Uh, this book, it holds up. It's such a good book. And honestly, I think I might want to rewatch the movie soon. My next honorable mention is Kingdom of the Cursed by Carrie Maniscalco. This is an interesting honorable mention, I'll admit, because I will admit I gave the first book and the third book 2 stars each. Didn't really like either. And the more I get, like, I'm away from the series and I sit on it, I like them even less. They weren't good. I'll fully admit that. They were not great. But for some reason, this second one just worked for me. I gave it 4 stars. And I definitely think this one focuses more on the relationship and the romance part, which is probably why I enjoyed it so much. Because honestly, the actual fantasy plot of this series, kind of all over the place. It's kind of a mess, if I'm being honest. It was hard to follow, especially in the third book. The third book, so much is thrown at you. And it got honestly kind of confusing for me there at the end. And these books are pretty short, so it's not like it was like a long read, but it was, my brain was fried. But this one, I ate it up. I thought it was so good. Do I recommend the series? Probably not. But I think you'll have a good time in the second book. The romance was fun. Next, we have Christina Lauren, True Love Experiment. This one, again, don't really have much to say. I gave it 5 stars, so you'd think I'd have some thoughts on it. But I read it a couple months ago. I don't really remember much. I do remember really enjoying it. I thought Fizzy, who's our main character, she was really funny. And this is the second book, and I think it's a duology. I think it's just a duet after The Soulmate Equation by also Christina Lauren, obviously. But it was a good time. It was a fun, lighthearted romance, and I thought it was a good time. It's definitely a great little palate cleanser book. Definitely a great, fun, quick read. I recommend. My next honorable mention was actually the first book I completed this year, Wait for It by Mariana Zapata. This one, also very good, as I'll continue to say. Let's mark off how many times I say very good in this video. But it was very good. I had such a good time with these. I know everyone here knows Mariana Zapata, queen of slow burn. Her books are long and they're slow. But honestly, they're worth it. The romance is worth it once you get to those very, like, you get all these little moments throughout the story, and then when you finally get to the romance and really into it, it pays off. It really does. I will say it's not my favorite Mariana Zapata. That will always be The Wall of Winnipeg. That was the first Mariana Zapata book I've ever read, so maybe that's why I just have so much loyalty to it, because maybe it's the first one, so I still think it's the best one, but I do think this is a very close second. Next, we have Four Bears Construction by K.M. Newhold, and I'm kind of giving the series as a whole somewhat of a shout out, but this year I did technically read books 2, 4, and 6, and these were again all rereads. I've read honestly multiple books in this series multiple times. Book 6, I'm pretty sure I've read 7 times since I first read it like 2 years ago. So clearly, I really enjoy this series. These are romances that follow the construction crew who work at Four Bears Construction. And they are short, fun, very low angst, and I do recommend. These are definitely books that I put on whenever I feel like I'm getting into a slump or I really just don't know what I want to read. I'll throw on my headphones, listen to the audiobook, and they're, like I said, short. I can finish them in one sitting, and I think they're a good time. My last honorable mention is We Used to Live Here by Mark Kleiwer, I think. This is a horror novel. I did really enjoy this. I thought the vibes were great. I thought it was honestly pretty creepy. I will admit, I am kind of a baby back bitch when it comes to anything horror. It does not take much to scare me. So if you're like an avid horror reader and you're a veteran of horror, will this one scare you as much as it scared me? Probably not. But I did think it had its creepy moments. The only reason I didn't really want to put this higher is just because if you're looking for answers by the time you get to the end of the book, you will get none. Not a single answer will be given. I really don't know what the hell was going on, and I never will, apparently. But I did think it was a good read. It was a good time, so I do recommend. All right, let's get into these top 15 books. I'm going to go by genre. So, first up, we are doing romance. And these are in no particular order within the genres. I'm just pulling it out. I think I do have them stacked up in the order somewhat in the order I read them. So that's the only real ordering here. We have the first 2 books in the Addicted series by Kristen Becker-Ritchie, Addicted to You and Ricochet. Now, this series follows Lily and Lo, who are both addicts. Lily is a sex addict and Lo is an alcoholic, and they are best friends, and they pretty much cover up for each other and vie for each other to hide their addictions to the public and their families. And throughout the story, this first one, honestly, it's very frustrating. It's a very frustrating read, but it's understandably frustrating because obviously they're addicts. Like, they're not making the best decisions. Their thought process, you're like, don't do that. Please don't do that. Like, stop doing that. Like, you're just making it worse for yourself. But that's to be expected. And honestly, I just really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed both of these characters. I enjoyed their relationship and kind of what they had to go through the first book. And a lot of people say that Ricochet is the weakest in the series. And I honestly enjoyed this just as much as the first book. I gave this 5 stars as well. And I'm very excited to continue on with the rest of the series, as well as get into the Calloway sister spinoff, interconnected standalones. I'm not really sure how they tie in, but I have very much enjoyed this series so far. And I cannot wait to get to the rest of it. Next up, we have Riches to Riches by Ames Mills. This is a book that I read earlier this year when I was pretty hard into a slump, and I felt like I just needed a fun mafia romance, smutty mafia romance to get me out of my slump, because usually that'll do it. If I read something quick, fun, smutty, that'll get me out of any sort of slump I'm in, generally. And this, like I said, it's a mafia romance. It's not quick because it is over 600 pages, but I will tell you, the 600 pages flew by for me. Like, I read this, I think, in like 2 days. It was so good. This is a polyamorous romance, so we have our female main character, and then there are 6 heroes. Technically, there's only 5 in this first book. The 6th one doesn't really get involved until the second book. This is a duet. The second book is shorter, if that helps. But this one, I honestly think this was just right book, right time. I flew through it. I ate it up. I thought it was so good. If I were to reread it now, would I like it as much? Maybe not. I'll admit, because I did read, there's a second duet in this series. I reread the first book in that duet, and I didn't love it as much. I will admit, I gave it 5 stars when I first read it, and upon reread, I gave it 3 stars. And honestly, it's probably lower. But I loved it at the time. Will I reread it? Maybe not, because I want to keep my love for it. But I thought it was very good, and I do recommend. Next, we have the Losers series by Harley Laroe. So that includes The Dare, which is the prequel novella, and then Losers Part 1 and Part 2. Again, this is another one. that I thought was really good. If I were to reread it now, would I love it as much? I don't know. But at the time that I read it, I flew through all three of these books. And I don't think either books in this duet are exactly short. I don't think they're super long. I don't think they're as long as Riches to Riches, but they're not like 200 pages. They got some page length on them. So this is basically a story about the popular girl, prom queen, cheer captain, and a group of boys who were seen as the losers in town, and kind of where the relationship goes from there. It all starts off in the Dare, which is a novella that takes place on one night. I think it's on Halloween, like a couple of years prior to the events in the main series. Basically, our female main character takes a dare from the male main character, where he basically is in charge of her for the entire night. And you can see where things kind of go from there, because it is smutty. It's very smutty. But I thought the Losers duet was fun. It was really good. The one thing that was really kind of tripping me up when I was reading this, that I couldn't understand, was the Losers part of this takes place after high school. They've already graduated. I think they've been out of high school a few years at this point. I may be wrong, but they've been out of high school for at least a year or two. And the our female character, her friends, the popular crowd, when they're talking about the guys, they're like, oh, they're such losers. They don't belong here. Don't they know that they're losers? And I was just like, how do you still care about that high school bullshit? Like, genuinely. I couldn't imagine being fully graduated, out of school, a job. Some of them have kids, I think. And still being like, oh, you're such a loser. You don't belong here. I'm popular. Ew. I was genuinely reading it. I was like, that's so embarrassing. Are you not embarrassed? I was like, couldn't be me. Couldn't be me. Simply couldn't be me. I would never associate with someone that embarrassing. Like, that's what's funny. That's what was funny to me. I'm like, you're calling them losers, but you're acting like a loser. And I'm pretty sure that's intentional. That's intentional from the author, that like showing clearly you never got past high school. You peaked in high school. Clearly you're the losers. But they're just like, you're such a loser. You don't belong here. Oh God, it was I couldn't. Our final book in the romance category is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This one was definitely a shocker for me, because I have read, I think, almost all of Ali Hazelwood's other books. The only ones I haven't read are Not in Love and Love Theoretically. But I've read the majority of the feminist novels, and I am not the biggest fan. I listened to Love on the Brand on audio. I thought that one was good. It was fine, but it wasn't anything that I was like, I gotta keep reading Ali Hazelwood. I'm eating it up, because so many people love this feminist novels, and they're like, I love every single one. I eat up every single one, and I was just like, they're fine, they're okay. They're a good little short, fun book to read in between some other books. But this one ate. This one was so good. This one gave me the feeling of when I was back in like middle school, high school, and I was reading like Twilight and Vampire Academy and all that. Like, it was just the perfect paranormal romance, and I loved it. This follows Misery and Lo. Misery is the daughter of like a very powerful vampire. He's part of the Vampire Council, and Lo is the alpha of the local wolf pack, and they enter into a marriage of convenience to kind of, I guess, bridge the gap between vampires and werewolves. And honestly, this was such a good time. All the werewolves like hate Misery because she now has to go live with them, because I guess that's part of the pact or whatever. They all hate her. They're all kind of awful to her. She's funny. She had me laughing during this. She like really didn't give a shit about any of it, and it was just such a good time. I did. And the infamous nodding scene that everyone talks about, that leave like, oh, it traumatized me. I hated it. I didn't like it. I'm gonna be honest. I've read many an Omegaverse. Okay. So the nodding thing really didn't faze me. And I've read books with like wolf shifters and they nod. That did not faze me at all. Didn't even blink an eye. But if you've never read one before, I can see how it might be shocking. But I do think this was great. I personally think this is one of Ali Hazelwood's bests. I think I'm in the minority, but it was a damn good read. And I am tentatively excited to read the other books I haven't read, and then also her new book that's coming out, Deep End. Our next category is contemporary, and I just have one for that, and that is Hotel Nantucket by Ellen Hildebrand. Now, this, another surprise, because I really wasn't expecting to like this as much as I did. Just thought this would be a quick, fun summer read, but I had such a good time with it. It follows a kind of whole cast of characters at the Hotel Nantucket. It has just been bought up by this like billionaire who pretty much never really shows up. He's just kind of in the background. And it's to be renovated and set up because there is a mystery hotel reviewer who's going to be in town, who's going to be visiting, and a review from them could make or break this hotel. And you're following pretty much a lot of the employees, some of the guests, and just kind of how they interact. And there's all these kind of mysteries somewhat happening in the hotel. There's also a ghost. So I don't know if that makes it somewhat magical realism, maybe. But there was a ghost, and the ghost does somewhat tie into the story because you got her backstory a bit. And honestly, it was just a really good time. It was a good time. And honestly, it made me want to go to Nantucket. Have I ever had the urge to go to Nantucket before now? No. Do I really know anything about Nantucket? No. Just what she wrote in this book. But I think, I might need to take a little vacay up there sometime soon. Our next category is sci-fi. First up, we have the first two books in the Expanse series, Leviathan Wakes and Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey. I read these books earlier this year. In fact, this year I read the first 5 books in this series. This is a 9-book series, so it is very long, but it is very good. This follows James Holden and the crew of the Rocinante, kind of all of the adventures and insane politics that happen within the galaxy, because this is a space opera. And pretty much you just see how shitty people on Earth are to each other, but now it's across the galaxy. They're still awful. They just have more space to be awful to each other. But this was a very good series, and I technically did start Leviathan Wakes, I think, early 2022, and I was kind of chipping away at it, but I decided to pick it back up, and I flew through the rest of it, and then I got into Caliban's War, and I will say Caliban's War is my favorite of the series so far. 1, the plot was just really good. 2, we meet my favorite character, Avasarala. I love her. She is, I don't even know what her station is in this book, because she's moved up since then. I don't know, I would say she's like a councilwoman on Earth, like part of the Earth delegation, and she's a character who has no filter, and intentionally has no filter, not because she's trying, no, she says what's on her mind, and it's profanity laden. I love that. I loved her. She didn't give 2 shits. She was not backing down. I love that for her. I loved her. She's the funniest character, I think, in this whole series, and we didn't really get much of her in books 3 or 4, and I will say my enjoyment of the series definitely dipped in 3 and then dipped more in 4, but I know most people say that 4 is the weakest of the series, and I would agree. Didn't love it as much. Book 5 definitely picks back up, especially because you guessed it, Avasarala is back. Clearly, that's what we need in this series. Avasarala. More and more Avasarala. Do recommend. I do hope to finish this series this year. We shall see. I was able to get through 5. Actually, I take that. I got through 4 last year. I finished the 5th book a couple days ago, so technically in 2025. And I'm hoping to get to the last 4 books this year. We shall see, because I am not great at finishing series. In fact, I consistently never finish them. I'm great at starting them, but I rarely ever finish them. But I'm going to try. I'm going to commit to finishing The Expanse this year. My dad would be proud, because he's been yelling at me for a bit to get to it, as well as another series on this list, but we'll get to that one in a minute. All right, our next book is The Martian by Andy Weir. This one, I really don't feel like I have to say much on this one. This one's very popular. It's very well known. We're following Mark Watney pretty much after he gets stranded on Mars, and he's trying to survive on this, I think, barren wasteland that really has no life, and he's the only one there. This book made me laugh, like I'm sure it does for most people, and it was one of these books that made me happy cry. I am not a happy crier, but I did while reading this book, and I was just as shocked as anyone else that I was happy crying. But it was such a good book. I don't know why I was surprised I enjoyed it so much, because clearly so many people do enjoy it and it's got so much hype, and it does have its movie adaptation, and I enjoyed both. Uh, I can't really say whether I enjoyed one or the other because it's been many years since I've seen the movie, but I will say the movie didn't make me cry. So I do recommend. I'm sure you've already read that, but if you haven't, I would say definitely pick up The Martian. Our next category is thriller. We've got two here. So, first up, we're going to talk about True Crime Story by Joseph Knox. This is all about the disappearance of a college student, Zoe Nolan. After a college party one night, she walks off and she's never seen again. And this book is written honestly really cool because it's basically a set of interviews, and it's framed as there's an investigator, as a journalist who's investigating into this, and this is all of her interviews compiled. And Joseph Knox, who's the author of the book, is technically a character within the book. He's kind of playing himself. He's an author, but he's like communicating with the investigative journalist, and they're going back and forth in emails, and we're getting all the interviews that are happening. And honestly, I really enjoyed this book. I think this is somewhat of an unpopular opinion because it doesn't have the highest rating on Goodreads, and everyone I've seen talk about it, I don't think they've enjoyed it as much as I did, but I thought it was really good. I didn't see the twist coming. I was gagged. I was fully gagged at the end of the book. And honestly, most thrillers, I don't read a lot of them, but a lot of them I tend to be disappointed by the twists. Either I see them coming or I just think they're lame. But this one I thought was really good. I liked it and I didn't see it coming. So I definitely recommend, if you enjoy it, if you enjoy an interview style book. I listened to the audiobook while following along in the regular book. And I do recommend that because obviously this is interview, so it's different. It's a full cast narration. There's different people. There's different narrators. But I do recommend somewhat following on with the book, maybe at the beginning, because only when you're first introduced to a character do they state the name of the person who's talking, and then they just kind of jump back and forth to different people. So until you kind of have to recognize their voice for you to realize who's talking. So I do recommend somewhat following on with the book at first if you're going to, just to make it a bit easier. Our next thriller is the last two books in the Natural series by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, All In and Bad Blood. Now, I really enjoyed these last two books. I will say, this is a series that follows a group of teenagers called the Naturals because they have these natural kind of abilities that the FBI wants to use to be able to solve crimes. Do you have to suspend your disbelief somewhat that the FBI would be recruiting a bunch of teenagers? Yes. But was it a great time? Yeah. Was it entertaining? Incredibly. I flew through both of these books as well as the second book. I will admit, I listened to the first book on audio early last year and I didn't like it. Why? I don't know, because it's not really any different, the first book to the next three books, but for some reason I really wasn't about it. But I picked up the second book, flew through these. I thought they were great. The last book I did say I felt a bit rushed at the end, but I still thought these were great. These are quick, fun thriller reads. Honestly, they got a bit darker than I was expecting. I don't know, maybe my expectation for YA is for it to be a bit more upbeat because I feel the same way about the book I'm going to talk about next, but it did seem a bit darker even for YA. But very good. Do recommend. Our next category is fantasy. First up, we have An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. In this book, we follow Leia and Elias. Leia, at the beginning of the book, her brother is arrested for treason, and she goes to a group of rebels to try and convince them to break him out of prison. And in order for them to do that, they say that she needs to go undercover and infiltrate into this military academy within this world. I don't remember what it's called. I don't think it says. She needs to go, and she's working as a maid for the commandant to try and get information back to the rebels. And we also follow Elias, who is a student or one of the soldiers within this military academy. And in his storyline, he's going through a set of trials, which are very entertaining. And I thought this book was really good. I was honestly somewhat surprised because I know this is kind of a BookTube OG fantasy book, and so many people really liked it. And I did own, I think books 1, 3, and 4 in the old copies, but I unhauled the entire set years ago because I did try the first book on audio, and I honestly got to a point where I was like, I just don't really care. I wasn't really into it. I didn't really feel like reading it, so I figured, I'm not really into the series. It's whatever. I'll get rid of it. But then the new covers came out and they looked beautiful, and what's Sarah Caroli. She was reading the first one and she said it was really good. It sounded interesting. And I was obsessed with the covers. I'll fully admit it. This was a cover by. I knew the story was good. People seemed to like it. And I wanted the new covers. So I got it. And honestly, it was really good. I really enjoyed it. I did start book 2, A Torch Against the Night, about halfway through. Also, really enjoying this. We also get more POVs in this one, and it's going really well. So I'll keep you updated. Next up for fantasy, we've got some heavy hitters. Emphasis on heavy. Words of Radiance and Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. I read both of these books this year. I read Words of Radiance back in September, and then I finished Oathbringer pretty much right at the final hours of 2024. I loved both of these books. Specifically, I really loved Words of Radiance. This book was another reread. I had read this previously the year before, I think a year or two before. I don't really remember. But the issue that I ran into is that I borrowed the audiobook through Libby. My library, at least, only allows for 2-week loans. And at the time, I was only releasing audiobooks when I was commuting or when I was cooking, when I was at home. So I wasn't getting through a 40, 50-hour audiobook within that 2 weeks. And my loan was coming up, so I decided to up the speed and just try and finish it as quick as I could. And I did a disservice to the book because by the time I got to the end, when I was watching other people's reviews of this book, they were like, oh my God, it was so good. The ending went crazy. All these things happened. And I was just kind of like, I don't remember any of that. I don't remember that happening. What are you guys talking about? And clearly, because I rushed through it, I missed so much. So on this reread, I picked up so much more stuff that I missed. Honestly, I missed something so big in like literally the final chapter. And I remember I was talking to my dad. This is one of his favorite series of all time. I was talking to my dad about one of my theories about something. I was like, hey, I think this is happening. He didn't say anything to me. And the thing is, I had read Words of Radiance at that time. It did happen at the end of this book, but I just like missed it or forgot. I don't know. But this was so good. I had such a great time reading it. The ending really did go crazy. It was such a good time. Oathbringer as well. Very long. This one, I will say, I feel like I felt the page length a bit more than I did in Words of Radiance, but I still felt like this was amazing. Again, the ending goes insane, and I'm excited to get to Rhythm of War and hopefully Winds and Truth this year. I will be doing my father proud if I can get through the end of Stormlight Archive finally, because I technically read Way of Kings before he did, and he's already read Rhythm of War. He hasn't gotten to Winds and Truth just yet. It did just come out, and he is finishing off the Malazan series, which we know that's a big read. He's on, I think, book 9 of 10 of Malazan, so he's got to finish that up, and then he's going to hit Winds and Truth. So who knows? Maybe if I'm quick enough, I can beat him to Winds and Truth, and I can finish it before him. Our next category is literary fiction. I just have one for this, and that is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. And in this book, we are following two brothers, Ivan and Peter, who are very different and have never really gotten along with each other. However, their father has just passed, and this is kind of forcing them to somewhat interact with each other. And it really just kind of talks about their lives right now and their sort of not tumultuous relationship, but their strained. That's better, right? It talks about their strained relationship. And this is another book where like Sally Rooney really just gets people and gets relationships. And I felt for both of these characters and I related to both of these characters, which is weird because I really have nothing in common with either of them. But I related so hard to both of them and both of their struggles and both of their feelings towards how they felt about the other. It just really resonated with me. And I thought this was great. This, I think, right now is my second favorite Sally Rooney. I have read all of her books. Normal People still takes the cake, but this is definitely second place, and I highly recommend. I thought it was very good. I did think it was a bit slow at the beginning, but I loved it. Our next category is nonfiction, and first up we have Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives by Siddharth Kara. This was a very good book. It was eye-opening, it was infuriating, it was honestly heartbreaking at times, but I really, really recommend this to everyone to read because this basically details the cobalt mining that is going on in the Congo right now and what is basically modern day slavery for the people of the Congo. And reading this book really, I shouldn't have been surprised, I guess, with the way the world is, but it was honestly really shocking to me reading about people's complete and utter disregard for human life. How some people think the people of the Congo deserve the place that they're at, and that if they just tried harder, maybe they wouldn't be in the situation, which is costing them their lives, their children's lives. And it was frustrating because you're getting interviews from people who work in the mines and people who are running the mines, and it's an aggravating read. It's a frustrating read. But it's a very good read, and it's very insightful. And I definitely think everyone should read this, because the absolute injustice that the people of the Congo are going through, and honestly, it's being facilitated by their government as well. I do recommend. If there's one book I think you should 100% read from this list, Cobalt Red. Read it. Next, we have Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. This basically details the family that owns Purdue Pharma, which was the company behind basically single-handedly starting the opioid epidemic in the United States. And this basically details the start of basically Purdue Pharma from, I think it was like 1930, 50, something like that, to now in modern day. And this was also very insightful. Before, this book, and I think a lot of other investigations, nobody really knew who the Sackler family was. We knew Purdue Pharma. We knew that they started the opioid epidemic, but we didn't know the people behind it. And now their names have come to light. This is definitely another frustrating read, because even though their names are now out there, they've never actually faced any real repercussions, because they've had people that they've used as scapegoats. They are able to use their money, their privilege, their power to pretty much get away scot-free. I think they said they gave up the company, or they sold the company, something like that. I don't particularly remember, but I mean, they still have their billions, and they face justice somewhat socially, because their peers have definitely taken a step back from them. But I definitely don't think it was because they think they are awful people, which they are. It was more that now that they are in a very bad light with public opinion, nobody wants to be associated with that. Nobody wants that to affect their business or their social standing. So their friends have definitely somewhat turned their back on them. Let's be honest, they're all still probably kikiing and golfing together. My last category is classics, and I just have one more for that, which was Antigone by Sophocles. This is one of the 3 Theban plays, and it is a Greek tragedy that follows Antigone. After the death of her brother, the king makes a proclamation that nobody's allowed to bury him, and she goes against his will. And things kind of fall apart from there. And honestly, this one was shockingly, I really enjoyed it. I mean, obviously, like, it's popular, it's a classic, but this was one that I flew through. Granted, it is very short, it's 58 pages, but I thought it was really good. I was chuckling at some points. I really liked Antigone as a character. She was very strong. She didn't really take shit, and I just really enjoyed it. I did, back in high school, watch, I think it was like a movie, might have been like a BBC adaptation, for all I know. I really have no idea. But we did watch the movie. I don't think we ever read the play. I don't know why. It's, like I said, it's very short, but I do have some, prior knowledge of the play. And I did enjoy the movie back then, but I think the play was great. I do recommend, if you're interested in reading one of the Theban plays, and I do plan to read the other 2 at some point. So those were my top books of 2024. Are there any that you agree with me on, that you enjoyed this year? Any that you maybe disagreed on? I'm willing to hear discourse. There's definitely probably a few in here that not everyone agrees with. But what were your favorite books of 2024? Let me know. But thank you for watching today, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.